It's time to ignite your soul and unlock your full potential. Join us on Beneath the Helmet, the podcast exploring firefighters' health and wellness. Hosted by retired Fire Chief Arjuna George, our podcast is the perfect place to start your journey towards becoming the best version of yourself. So come on, let's join the conversation and find out what sets your soul on fire.
All right, welcome back to Beneath the Helmet. Today I got a very special guest with me, Executive Director of Wounded Warriors Canada, Scott Maxwell. So Scott joined WWC about 10 years ago and has been leading that organization from where it used to be 10 years ago to a very diverse and inclusive organization that's not just for veterans of the military, but all first responders, including frontline workers, hospital staff, any area that has trauma involved in it, they are now servicing and supporting that community. So please sit back and enjoy this conversation with Scott and myself as he discusses his experience moving through the last 10 years of as Executive Director of Wounded Warriors Canada and his amazing vision for the future, being inclusive of all trauma-informed and trauma-affected personnel across Canada. So until next time, stay well. All right, welcome back, everyone. Today I got a very special guest with us, Executive Director Scott Maxwell of Wounded Warriors Canada. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Thanks for having me on.
You betcha. So tell our viewers and our listeners today a little bit about who Scott is, where you came from, and what brought you to be in the ED of Wounded Warriors Canada.
Sure. So I never really foresaw myself sitting in this chair talking to you after 10 years in this particular sector doing this work. Life is charged its own course sometimes for it. That certainly was my situation. I went to school, wanted for international relations and Canadian foreign policy, and thought maybe a diplomatic role through Global Affairs Canada, Foreign Affairs Canada at the time would be something I'd really like to do, something that's not static and the same all the time. But also helping in the public policy realm of service to the country. So that's really what I went to school for, did coming out of university, and found myself as a young man on Parliament Hill, jumping into the fray of what that would be, working for the Minister of Consular Affairs at the time, whose name is Dan McTagg, so I started doing that work and just interceding and helping, supporting Canadians who were detained illegally overseas. Was the job. And I was like, perfect. I'm putting all this to good use, and school meets job. That's a good thing. So that's where I was off and running. And that was in the mid 2000s period of time, which was, as we all know, was a very bad time for Canada in Afghanistan, particularly that 2006, 2007 period, notwithstanding all of the period, but that there was a lot of deaths taking place, unfortunately. And one of nearly what also affected my boss, Dan McTagg's nephew, Sapper Mike McTagg, was nearly killed by a roadside bomb, and other Canadian soldiers were killed in that IED explosion. And I remember the call when Dan was aware that his nephew might die as a result of that, and just what was going on with the family and what the steps were and the whole thing. So I had a backseat view of what was happening there. And from that situation, Mike McTagg survived, and the Sapper Mike McTagg Wounded Warrior Fund was established. And so I was just sitting really as a passenger, looking at this, paying attention, beginning to pay attention to a new veterans charter and lots of things that were changing while so much was happening overseas. For me, that was the first kind of foray into the uniformed service side of things in my life. Not coming from a steep military background, certainly not my immediate family, and just but yet finding myself in the fray in Ottawa, paying attention to these things. And then a high school friend of mine, Daryl Caswell, who I was sitting next to on 9/11 when the second plane hit the tower, and he said, that's it, I'm going to go and join the Canadian Forces, and I'm going to go over there and get these people. And I was very upset. We all were watching that in an auditorium as young people. Not really sure what the heck is going on and why. He joined the Canadian Forces while I was doing all this. He was over there, the whole thing. And next thing, a year later, in June of 2007, Daryl, I was sitting there having my breakfast, and his picture came up on the screen saying that he was killed overnight in an IED explosion. So it's just this very galvanizing year-ish period for me in my life where I was thinking, never thought of myself even ever going to be thinking about a conflict that Canada was involved in overseas. And yet here I was from professionally with what was going on with Mike McTagg's injuries, establishment of that fund, and then a year, not long afterwards, Bowmanville, Ontario, small town meets kind of Kandahar, and wow, that had me thinking about life in a very profound way about, all things, many things at times, whether you like it or not, may be connected, and for good or bad, and thought the way that I know that kind of my friend was treated when he was joining the Canadian Forces, because there just wasn't near the respect from the Canadian kind of population towards the CF back then. That thankfully changed as a result of Afghanistan, but even before 9/11 or just even thereafter, it still hadn't been established. And you're going for the free education and all these types of things I heard said to him when he was saying he was going to go and join. I thought, looking back, this has got to change. We got to do better by those that serve our country. And that was my impetus to say to myself, if I could do anything to be involved in something that's going to help pay that forward, then I'm going to do it. So I carried on with my career for a number of years, went from the federal public service side of things in foreign affairs to the provincial government system in Ontario, children and youth services, adolescent mental health, kind of got my feet into the mental health side of life. And then had enough of all of that around 2012-13. I knew that Sapper Mike McTagg Wounded Warrior Volunteer Fund was still operating and sending comfort items to the troops overseas who are injured in theater and being cared for at an American Military Hospital in Langsdale, Germany. So I stayed in touch with all of that. And then when we got out of Afghanistan as a country, it was now what? What are you going to repatriate the fund from Germany? There was this massive demand coming at this little volunteer fund for operational stress injury support, of which it was not set up to address it, equipped to deal with. So they then, thankfully, the board at the time said, we either wind this down, shut it down, or we think to see if we can do something domestically that can respond to this emerging need. So I'm glad they did that for a whole bunch of reasons. And so I got a phone call from the board chair at the time in 2012, going into 13, saying, hey, we're looking to set something up domestically here around mental health. Would you want to come and just give us a hand setting it up and standing it up? And I thought, sure, I'll do that. Leave a nice change from the everyday of government. Never hurts anybody. And I felt it was the time for me to maybe pay that promise that I made to myself way back years and years earlier forward and get started doing that. So I joined the organization as the first and only employee in January of 2013. And my goodness, what a curve it has been over the last 10 years. And I'm sure I'll touch on a bit of all of it through this conversation.
Beautiful. Yeah. 10 years ago, eh? That's impressive. So well done.
Thank you.
So who does the Wounded Warriors serve in today's organization, today's environment? Who are the people that can benefit from this program?
Absolutely. As we started coming into the inception of Wounded Warriors Canada in 2013, it was military veteran and family members. And my goodness, we have really expanded that. In 2016, we expanded the scope of the mission of the organization to include first responders, public safety personnel nationally and their families. And then because of the growth of the services and the programs and the reality of the effects of trauma exposure, we really have been able to leverage some of our services into other forms of trauma exposed people, like in healthcare through COVID, for example. Just other people always calling and inquiring to learn a little bit of what we formed as a bit of an expertise. So here we are today, and we classify those that we serve as trauma exposed professionals. So to try to get away from titles of Canadian Forces and veterans, is it public safety personnel, or is it first responders, or is it this, or is it that, or the dispatchers and communicators, all these kinds of, and correctional service officers feeling so much always out of the definition of a first responder. We just said, okay, enough of trying to describe this all the time. Let's just call those we serve, because it's true, trauma exposed professionals. So TXPs is our population. We state that explicitly in all of our communications now, and it fits perfectly because for the work that we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great term because like you say, there's dispatchers, there's all sorts of agencies out there that are all part and parcel of our society, and they're all helping us, and they're all facing trauma. Quite often they do get left out. It's fire, police, and ambulance is what you hear. So
exactly. And I particularly, we really got to this point through COVID in response to the healthcare professionals that have been were overwhelmed today, to this day, but specifically through that period of time. And we thought, okay, where do you classify all of these people? At the end of the day, what's been good about it is while we've using that term, you initially felt like it broadened or the mission creep was really growing. Actually, it wasn't. It actually brought a lot of clarity and focus to who we serve. Because if you're trauma exposed and you're a professional and that's what you're doing as part of your execution of professional responsibilities and duties, then in what we teach and what people are learning and benefiting from is going to apply. So it's actually been a really great exercise for the organization as we've continued to evolve and respond to different people. For example, Garda World just recently, private security companies, guardians on First Nations communities who are effectively security guards by training, but are first responders in practice. So we're just learning all over the place about who these trauma exposed people and professionals are and finding different ways to help them. But in order to do that, we really wanted to make sure they felt home here at Wounded Warriors Canada. So the terminology is important.
It is, definitely. Yeah, and all the mental health discussions, terminology, language is so critical to making people feel safe, included. I'd say included is probably number one, right?
Yeah, as we say, we've updated our mission statement just in the last year to helping Canada's trauma-exposed professionals, but at the time it was veterans, first responders, and their families feel safe, supported, and understood.
Yeah, beautiful.
So those are the three things that we are doing for those that we're serving, and that's not from we didn't sit down in a boardroom and come up with that. That was right from the testimonial feedback and the summative data collection that we do from all of our program participants across every program areas. When we asked them, what did this program do for you? And similarly for somebody else. And this is overwhelmingly was the common feedback we received: safe, supported, and understood. And that makes a lot of sense for us.
Sure does. Coming in 10 years ago as the ED, what was some of your main priorities to improve Wounded Warriors Canada?
It's a great question. For me, it was really initially find ways for NGOs to be impactful and helpful. Back then, when you're just caught between two massive departments in the Department of National Defense and Veterans Affairs Canada, and you had all these kind of micro entities and projects that were trying to be helpful for members of both of those departments, be it still serving members or retired members. It was, is there a role? And if there is, how can it find its niche in the service delivery side of things? So that was the first goal for me, was to try to see where organizations like ours, like in the not-for-profit service sector, could be effective and could have a role to play. And then identifying the gaps that where these roles could be played. And then building the team, the services, the fundraising, the funding, the revenue generation, the whatever, all at the same time to make sure you can do it in a sustainable way. So that was what I was looking at when I was starting out, was those three pillars, if you will, all simultaneously to try to make sure that it's easy. Okay, so we'll figure out we can maybe do something here, but is that where the need is? And if it is, can you do it sustainably and have a great year and then never be there to respond thereafter because funding's dried up or you didn't have a plan or whatever the case may be. And you see that, unfortunately, quite often in the charitable world, because it is hard to be sustainable in your efforts. And not just do what you did last year, but if you're doing it good and you're helping people, the chances are there's going to be more and more people coming at you. So it's not just doing what you did last year effectively. It's, can you do what you did last year and more every single year as you grow forward? And that's been something that I'm certainly proud of from a growth perspective. And growth for us is not in shareholder success, it's in client success.
What were some of the elements that you learned about yourself in the last 10 years?
The old adage is stick with it. Don't get, too high on anything and too low on anything. Just stick with the plan, keep your head down. Don't overpromise and underdeliver on anything. Do what you can do to the best of your ability from a quality perspective, from an outcome perspective. And if you keep doing that over and over and over again, always, you're probably going to get there and be standing 10 years later. It's very easy, especially as mental health was starting to become more topical, more relevant, more timely when we were sitting in the middle of it. There was a million different projects or straws you could grasp for and grasp at. And that could lead you all over the place and not very clearly focused in terms of what you want to be and what you want to do. And we stayed away from all that. So I learned about myself that I was able to maybe stick to a plan and that I devised that I had never done before in my other professional situations, and just be confident in sticking to it and building a team that wants to stick to it and understands the same thing and is everyone's boring in the right direction and not trying to pull you or anybody else all over the place where you can really, the organizations you can see how fast that could fall apart. So
Mhm.
for me, it was hard work, sticking to the plan, and then conversely not deviating from the plan, which when it often increasingly became very easy to see how you could do that. And then really try to find the right people, and not to say that it's versus bad people, but try to find the right people to be in the right places
Mhm.
to let the organization continue to grow and thrive. Those are some of the things from a leadership perspective that I've learned about myself in the last 10 years.
How about your perspective on mental health when you joined 10 years ago compared to how you are sitting right today? Your views, your thoughts, your own self-care. What's some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, certainly myself, learned lots of self-care lessons along the way. When you're not a large organization, as we certainly weren't for most of this journey, you're really interfacing with those that you're serving all the time. Like on a personal level, you're out at events all the time. You're getting to know ill and injured people that are really struggling that obviously want to help. And that's great, but you can't be friends with everybody. You can't be responding to their needs and what they're looking for and all this all the time. And I found myself at times having a hard time being the executive director of Wounded Warriors Canada and then just a compassionate Canadian that wants to
Mhm.
do everything I possibly can for everybody that writes to me or calls me or texts me or messages me on Facebook or whatever the case may be, and that maybe finding themselves in a tough place. I found that to be a very difficult part of certainly the earlier, or at least half of the journey before we had more of a team around me and everybody else to take pressure off of those realities that exist. Certainly from a self-care perspective, that was something I learned to find a balance of much better than I did in the early days. And I mean, just learning about mental health, you learn that just being on the front line kind of thing, but also you just learn more about mental health as as the psychoeducational perspective, the scientific perspective of what to look for in yourself, how to check on yourself, how to take care of yourself. I've started to learn a lot more of those things in the last 5 years than what was available and being talked about publicly 5 years earlier. It was a paired exercise, just realizing just myself, I need to do better. I can't keep doing this, but also coming on board with learning more about the scientific side of the brain with the team we had built and the programs we were running. And you put those two things together and it made it a lot easier. Mental health generally in the sector, my goodness, like how far we've come for a number of different ways in the it's hard to believe it's only been a decade from leaps and bounds from where we started. But at the same time, like anything, when so much changes so quickly, that doesn't necessarily make it easy and perfect. And it is certainly not that today. And there's still a long way to go, but we've opened the door so far that's forced all these conversations to use like a fire adage, a lot of oxygen into the flames that is making it very difficult for organizations and organizational leaders across the organization, and even members to try to connect all the dots on, okay, I'm recognizing this, or I'm looking for help, or where is the help internally and how do people find it, or how do they find it in the community? There's all these intersecting pieces that need to be intersecting better that I think we have a long way to go on as a mental health kind of continuum or community that are still letting far too many people down. But that's a consequence in large part, I think, of the success of where we've come with around the common conversation, understanding the fact that we've now are trying to make these injuries be deemed as they are as honorable injuries as any physical injury is and is seen for any uniformed service person. It's almost everyone stands to salute you if you can physically see the wound, but we know that's never been the case to the extent that it should have been from a psychological perspective. So lots of growth, lots of good things happening there, which of course, like anything, when you really scale and grow very fast presents its own challenges.
Love it. Yeah, I agree 100%. We still got a long way, but we are making strides. Like you say, 10 years just in WWC, but 10 years in mental health discussions, talks, total game changer. And this podcast is here to continue that conversation with people, right? So,
And what's a great example of that? Look at the ability to reach people that want to listen, and the amount of people I talk to that are getting their mental health information in places like this versus their employer versus whatever else, their benefit provider, whatever. Just the power of technology and communication around mental health and wellness is in and of itself is light years ahead of where we were. And that's a very good thing.
yeah, that's a thing of beauty. So, I'd love to open up Scott's self-care toolkit and see what's inside your toolkit. What does Scott do for self-care, actual tools that you could share?
Yeah, exercise for me is a big one because the nature of my job is I'm often sitting a lot, and I found myself not feeling very energized at the end of a long day, not just tired of screen time, tired of talking, tired of doing interviews, tired of doing not this one. Like it's an example. Like these are great, but for anyone that's doing this kind of work in my shoes, you're often just doing a lot of it. It's not just talking outward at people through a screen, but it's also just being in front of a screen for a very long period of time over the course of a week, not feeling very energized around that. So for me, it was diet and exercise. I know that's probably the most common things that any GP is going to tell you in the country, but for me, it became something that I really wanted to focus on. So just getting either in the morning or any part of the day, frankly, if I need to take the time, I take the time to check in on myself and do something we teach in our trauma resiliency program called the Better Check. So body, emotions, thoughts, and relationships, and making sure that you're checking in, you're doing your better checks. I'm doing my better checks all the time. Our team is doing our better checks all the time to make sure that if something is sticking out that's missing amongst the better check list, that we're then doing something about it. That's something that I brought in personally, we bring into the organization, and I try to follow suit on. As I mentioned, diet is big, and just making time to have good social relations. We got really busy. COVID really blasted big holes in the ability of people to maintain positive social relationships. And as we know from psychology, positive social relationships is critical to the balance and the energy and people's desire to feel supported. So losing that, like we all did, was very hard. I noticed that in me. So getting back to whether it's family, whether it's friends, whether it's my relationship with my wife, whatever, just doing things and making the time to do things that are going to give me the pleasure of social relationships. And I've learned in doing research and reading on the value of that from a clinical perspective, how much it matters, much less just from a day-to-day life kind of perspective for someone like myself. So I would say the social relationship part, the exercise part, and what I'm putting into my body is something that I'm certainly focused on more now than I ever have before.
Yeah. Yeah. Relationships are a basic human need. Doesn't matter if you're an extrovert, an introvert, whatever title you want to put on that. Every single person needs some sort of human interaction. It's just built into us. So,
Yeah. And I didn't realize to the extent that the effects would have on a diet, like on a mental health, like diagnosis or a state of some sort of injury, that the consequences of it. And we know from doing it yourself and from those that you've worked with and supported and just know personally the impacts of the isolation and the shame that comes with an injury like PTSD or depression or these types of things. They really compound other things very fast. And I would say that can happen to anybody just as much as it does, obviously, as we know, for those that have been injured. So something I've been very cognizant of, and I try to talk to people about, is if we know from people that we treat in our group programs, I'll have our clinicians always come to say, geez, it seems like 50% of what we're treating this person or these people for has to do with what they've seen and what they've done in the execution of the professional responsibilities. But the other side is creeping up so much. The other percentage is creeping up so much higher over the years, is how they were perceived or received when they put their hand up or wanted to have conversations around how they were feeling, which of course is that whole sanctuary organizational betrayal piece. And that's all to do with negative social responses. So the value of positive social responses makes as much sense as the consequence that we continue to see when the social responses are negative.
Yeah, 100%. You briefly touched on that program that you talked about the mind body.
Yeah.
Can you just go into a little bit more detail of what that is and how that could be used as maybe a mindful moment for somebody before they go to work or whatever?
Yeah, yeah, I always think, like, I'm a practical person. So what I like to do, I could read, and I do, you read a lot, and but how can I actually take what I'm learning and trying to apply it in my daily life? So, like, the better checks and these kinds of things were very helpful for myself, just being, as I say, a practical person, that I like to know what I like to have tools in the toolbox, and not just theoretical stuff that
Systems.
systems, like in theory, things that, yeah, I understand why this is happening. I appreciate that, but what can we do to mitigate it? What can we do to get in front of it? Just the value of having skills and skill-based learning for me is really super important and vital if I'm actually going to do anything. I think that's the value that I get out of doing those checks, tying, if I'm thinking about something, into what I can then do about it, and just having a really practical lens about something that, because it's not seen necessarily, it is a psychological situation you may be facing, unlike a physical one where you can go, okay, I know I got to put a Band-Aid on my wrist because I cut it, or on any part of my body because I cut it, or I've injured this or that. I know what the solution is. And that's because of the physical way we've been trained in Canada, thankfully, as physical injuries. Here's what you do about it.
Mhm.
And my goodness, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had a more common, generalized understanding about what to do when you're starting to feel this way or that way or a way. So I think for me is something that I wanted to start with personally, and then begin to use the leverage of our organization, partnerships, friendships, just like this, to help maybe get that to other people.
Mhm. Amazing. Where do you see the future of Wounded Warriors Canada? What would be your dream if you could see it happen and you're like, I finally have not a legacy per se. 'Cause, legacy is a very group terminology for this because there's a lot of people that play part in this work,
Oh yeah.
Wounded Warriors.
Yeah.
But if you could just have that dream, where would it be? Where would it land?
It's been tiered, I guess, for me, because the first goal I wanted to do when we got started was be supporting first responders. So we made that extension in 16, and then we wanted to make sure that we just weren't doing this on our own. We wanted to get, like, the WorkSafe BCs, the WSIBs, the employer and benefit provider partners in as a sustainability legacy recognition, that the organization, we're an organization that these people want to have to help their people. That's something I could only have dreamt about when I started doing this in the back of a broom closet in January of 2013 with a bunch of dead hornets in the ceiling. One step at a time, not necessarily be too grandiose, but think, if we just can build to here, then maybe we can build to here. Like a bit of a more of a blocked approach. Then wouldn't it be nice just to shoot for some sort of whatever the moon looks like? And that's how I've taken it. So where we're at now, from where I would like to go, having successfully achieved those earlier benchmarks and visions or dreams, is to maybe set up a system whereby the one thing we don't do right now is have a national network of Wounded Warriors Canada individual clinicians, we have a big clinical team. They mainly manage their own day-to-day out of their own practices and come to us to do the specialized group counseling work. But I see a future where, in one-stop shop, maybe they could really, no matter where someone is in the country, is looking for a culturally competent or occupationally aware clinician to begin their journey on that one-to-one psychotherapy basis, that they could find that through Wounded Warriors Canada. So just rounding out our service delivery to make it even more robust than it already is. So, because I still see a huge gap in that in Canada right now. As I put a hand up, I've taken a knee, I've sought help now, which is great, the first step, obviously. But when there's no connection in a culturally specific way or timely way, and as you well know, they have to be both of those things when you're supporting trauma exposed professionals. You can't just have one or the other. To me, it's really to have them both. There's gaps there. So if we can really begin to bridge some of those and have an individual clinical network in the country that's working through and by Wounded Warriors Canada, that would really round out what we do. And then I really would like to begin to leverage international relationships to build on best practices, work with our allied nations, the Five Eyes, other groups like that, where we've all served overseas. We serve similarly domestically, but from a trauma exposed professional basis. I've had outreach from a Ukrainian group that reached out here this last week, and I'm talking to them next week. about all of the trauma and the situations going on with first responders who are civilian, which are now first responders / military members. We're so close to the United States with so much commonality across that. I have been to Israel, to Tel Aviv to train a group over there that does the same work for their trauma exposed professionals on the front line domestically. I would like to see a more of a robust best practices collaboration that's going on, that's not going on currently amongst our allies with this kind of work, to continue to learn and share best practices and see how we can all do better. So that's something that's missing I'd like to achieve. And then continue to push organizations to, the old way of having an EAP program that is, we all know, is largely insufficient for this population, is not the standard anymore. And that culturally specific services like ours are brought in, and others are brought in to augment and form a new and different layers of operational stress injury support for EAP programs and much better early intervention service support that it's really failing so many people right now. So it's something we could work on now, and it's not really visionary as much as, but it is in a sense, because it takes a lot of time to make these changes. That's why I realized, having worked in government internally, and now I work with it externally, because everybody that we serve is some level of a government employee. For the most part, you're up against big bureaucracy at every turn and very limited financial support for psychological safety and protection. You can't really do it. You can't expect to do much if you don't look at these things from a 10-year lens.
Yep. And when we're financially handcuffed and resource handcuffed, that's when you reach out to your allies and your relationships and your networks, and that's where you get the shared knowledge for free, right?
Yeah, for free, and also the workarounds. If you can fund something into a service that can't fund it itself, that's what we do. The vast majority of all of Wounded Warriors Canada's development and delivery to get to where we are came from the care, compassion, and generosity of Canadians, charitable dollars, contributions that have allowed us to not worry about bigger bureaucracy, not worry about dead ends, but actually just worry about developing the best programs that are going to help this population and delivering it to them and their organizations at no cost to both of them. So talk about force multiplier effects. And that's how we've done it. We've built these employer relationships and these organizational based relationships, not from the top down, but from the bottom up at every level, where the participants have come to program A, B, C, or D here, and then went back to their workplace. They stayed actively employed. They changed for the better. And everyone's going, where did you go? And how did that happen? And then it starts to percolate from the bottom up, to the extent that we then have conversations and it comes top down. So it's, that's how the things that I'm looking at and working on right now, and also building a much more robust continuum of care within the mental health service providing community. So it's not just the employer and the employee realm. There's a lot of work to do there, but there's a lot of progress being made. It's when we became a mental health service provider through and through, in and around 2017. And what I mean by that is we weren't funding, we were set up initially as a foundation, take in contributions and fund out to third-party community providers of whatever service it was. We stopped doing that entirely. So all the fundraising dollars into the foundation side of Wounded Warriors Canada are funded then into mental health services here. So they fund all of the different programs that we have that support individuals and couples and spouses and surviving family members and kids, and then some even upstream trauma-informed training. So when we started doing all that in-house, top to bottom, started looking around going, hey, we're in healthcare now. We're in the service delivery realm now. Who else is doing that? Who are the other players? And why aren't we connecting or connected with them? And more importantly, why haven't they been connected with each other after all these years? So it's bringing the Homewoods, the Edgewood Health Networks, the CAMHs, the various health partners, the WorkSafes, together to say, this isn't a competitive exercise, folks. Unfortunately, there's more work for all of us to ever go around than we could ever even hope to accomplish. So recognizing that and getting that off the table, what are we going to be able to do together to help build a true, actual continuum of care that won't leave people behind and in dead ends all the time? So that's a big vision of mine. It's going to take a long time, no doubt, to accomplish, but we are already making strides against it.
Yep. Nothing wrong with a stretch goal.
No.
So I'd love to highlight some of the programs that you offer. And I'm assuming this is offered all across Canada,
Oh,
every
absolutely.
province, every territory.
Yeah, and if we can't, and in some of the smaller provinces, in particular Saskatchewan and Manitoba, like we're working. COVID really upended our ability to continue to scale up clinicians who are registered in their respective provinces and find venues. But we're back to that now. But if we can't, let's say someone's calling from Saskatchewan or Manitoba, we don't have a delivery venue and clinicians delivering a program in a suitable time frame there, we'll just get them to the program in Ontario or Alberta, or whatever the case may be, to get the help. So geography is not a barrier to access these services. And we serve most of the country in the respective provinces.
So what would be some highlights of the programs that you do offer that maybe some of the listeners would be interested in learning more about?
I'd say a bit of our hallmark of what we do is we've always taken a 360 approach to service and the injured side of the population, that this is not just an individual situation, that the member doesn't just get injured and become injured and live injured on their own, that the family is such a part of service and sacrifice and injury that has long been overlooked and ignored. So there's only one program of all the services we provide that does not include a family member. So that one program I mentioned is called our trauma resiliency program. And that program in itself is just for individual members. And all of the other services in the program we provide are equipped for spouses and surviving spouses and family members and kids. That to me is a bit of our hallmark, in that we really provide for ill and injured, trauma exposed professionals and their families.
Scott, it'd be interesting to hear from your perspective, being in this for the last decade. What trends are you seeing in first responders that we're seeing a bigger growth in? Is it PTSI? Is it moral injury? Is it organizational stress? Where are you seeing some common trends?
The biggest trend I'm seeing is more of the sanctuary.
Hmm.
The organizational betrayal piece seems to me to be two things: organizational betrayal and massive burnout from the healthcare community.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that's not the members themselves, but obviously it directly affects the capability of the members themselves. Because if we can't find clinicians and we can't retain clinicians and we can't find the right people to help those that we're all trying to help, then we got a big problem. So on the first side of things, I would say what we have seen creep up, I was saying earlier, is just the lack of positive social response and understanding how to have these conversations when someone presents or is talking about the fact that they might be struggling, and the subsequent impact on that can at times maybe be even worse than what they've seen and what they've done, to have things stick with them. And then you feel like you're going to go and have a conversation with someone that wants to help you or can help you or even make you feel supported, and it doesn't happen. So I think and then because of it, what we're seeing with so many people go off into presumptive legislation situations with diagnosed injuries is, I've talked to a lot of people that would say, look, I tried to get help. I tried to get service support internal or feel supported internally or earlier and often. And it just didn't happen for one reason or the other, or they didn't have the resources in-house. They weren't equipped to help me. And so I needed to help myself to not further spiral and become further injured. And so I just went around the internal system, went for the presumptive side of things to actually get the care I know I needed for myself. And a lot of the employers and HR folks they're stunned right now. They're stunned going, what? We're losing all these people and there's people going off all the time. Yeah, because we're all telling them they should access the supports that they deserve and they need, and they're not able to do it because we're talking about all of these things the right way to some extent from an employer-employee realm, let's say. But when it actually comes to accessing something that's going to be beneficial to them, there's a big gap in so many different circumstances right across the country. So in the absence of finding what they know, what they're being told they should access, they're just going very much often around the system entirely and just going off work. And that makes a lot of sense to me, because if I know I need something to help me or from any perspective, I'm going to go and try to find it. And if it requires me not to get that outside of the work environment, I know everyone's telling me I should be taking care of myself, and which is the case. But unfortunately, it's really causing a lot of turmoil within the employer-employee active duty realm that I continue to see. And as I say, it's leaving a lot of people that are in the middle of that process, organizational leaders, chiefs, HR folks, stunned as to what to do and how to manage this better. Because as I say, we open up the door, the floodgates open when it comes to the conversation around mental health, what you should be doing, access care and all that. But it was not even closely being met with the access piece on the front end at all. And that's a big challenge for this sector right now.
Interesting.
So that's what we see the most, is that dilemma, that battle between having all the right conversations, saying all the right things, doing it right, maybe from a communications or what have you standpoint, putting up all the right posters and doing all that. But if it actually doesn't meet care, we've got a problem.
Yeah. And that's a common thread that I keep hearing. It's just the check boxes and get the operational guidelines out there, get the posters on the wall, but no action at the end. And I think that's an area that we can all learn from. I'm probably guilty of that myself, of putting up a poster and thinking I was doing a good job, right? But there's more to it than that. There's more to it than podcasts, and more to it than
I would
going
say
to conferences, right?
Yeah, listen, I would say everybody's got every aspect. There's a role for all of it. But at the end of the day, what really, to me, what the rubber meets the road on, like on care, on actual support. It's no different than any other form of life. We can have wellness conversations and get good communication around what best practices and tools and tips, which is generated from all of this good stuff. But at the end of the day, if I need something that requires assistance, I need to know where to go to get that eventually. So there's a role for all of this in the system, and certainly in this sector. But if it doesn't end up meeting to me, what is the most important aspect, which is clinical, culturally specific, timely, clinical care for somebody at whatever level they need it at, then we're only going to get so far. And it's probably going to end up leading to as much frustration as it has in the sector, because it's a lot of, I hear it all the time, just talk. Everyone's talking. And yes, we're trying to do this. This is our responsibility. I think we all take it pretty seriously, that we want to get the message out. We want to make sure people at least initially feel comfortable to have these conversations. And that's the role of all this, and to learn and to feel supported and safe to have them. And then therein lies the next step. Okay. So they're feeling safe, they're feeling comfortable being to have them. And if that door is slammed, then we are where we are in way too many situations and occurrences. And that's frustrating.
I hear you. I'm a very somatic, holistic person when it comes to trauma recovery. I believe that the body and the mind is all part and parcel of recovery. It'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on it, because you shared the book, The Body Keeps a Score, with me, which it's been on a few podcasts now of that book. I'd love to hear why you sent it. And is it something that you, in Wounded Warriors, that there is that holistic approach where it's not just the psychological part of it, it's the mind and the body at the same time? What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, no, 100%. I sent along because I've probably reread it 3 or 4 times now. It's been referred to me by our senior clinical team as the best reading that they've ever come by, certainly from one of the best scholars and practitioners they've ever known or have worked with or read about. So that was the first reason. And then second was, in just reading it, thinking about just how much of a role that the author puts on social connection, and just not being a simple way of the DSM-5 criteria, therefore we know what's wrong with somebody, which it almost caught me off guard a little bit in reading it through. Wow, there's a holistic approach to what in someone's life, how they may end up being arrested or injuring themselves or being diagnosed with one or more diagnoses. So it was, or just trying to overdiagnose somebody because you're not actually getting the root cause of the cause, and all it for so many different reasons as to what I've learned over the years, what I've seen. It just tied it all together as beautifully as I've ever seen it tied together.
Nice.
And it's a holistic approach, the body and the mind, but also the importance of social connection, which we obviously see and believe in. because social connection is the hallmark of group counseling.
Yes.
And so, as group counseling being everything that we do from a downstream interventional perspective, seeing the positive effects of that every day for years, it's okay. That he spoke to me that way and reinforced that you can have the best therapists talking to someone individually, one-on-one forever, but you often see as much positive outcomes, if not more, when they're around when they're not being cared for in an isolated environment, i.e. house basement to individual practitioner counselor's office, back to the house basement, back to the office. You can see how this manifests itself even in care.
Yes.
So the whole part about the group part that we see the dynamic of is not, you got to leave for a while. You're going to be around these people who you've never met before, who are similarly affected for for a week or more at a time. You're going to give and receive support back and forth with strangers, and you're going to benefit tremendously from it. And that power of the social connection part is really stood out to me in that particular book, that it was reassuring and reaffirming.
Well, I appreciate you sharing it, because I think the more and more people talk about this book in particular, the better, because I think it needs to be in the hands of all first responders, maybe even everyone in the world.
I think so.
Everyone has traumatic experiences through their life. You look at what's going on in Maui in 2023, and then all across Canada, all across North America, in the wildfires. There's so much trauma being exposed to those civilians that have no training on this, right? So, yeah, there's going to be some severe backlash of trauma of this all.
Yeah, 100% there is. And it's, as there is, I don't know, like every day it's something is happening. I don't know. I would ask any first responders, I don't know, those that you work with from your past experience to where you see society and communities, traumatic situation and events. Now it's all I ever hear is it's unprecedented. It never before seen, certainly at the pace and the scale that we're seeing it. Whether you're a civilian bystander witnessing it as, therefore, as the call for the first responders, just the amount of people exposed to trauma is in an unprecedented situation and fashion is really something that, why I think you're right. The book should really, as applicable to me as a civilian, no matter the work that we do here every day, to any other civilian as it is to anybody that's responding to the call.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for sharing that. What's one question that I haven't asked you that you wish I did ask you?
Jeez. Maybe what was maybe a single large success or something that stands out as, I don't know. Maybe there's sometimes you got to ask that question all the time.
Yeah. So for WWC, what's the number one pinnacle success that you've seen in the last 10 years that maybe you're most proud of, or that's made the most difference in people's lives?
Yeah, for me, it was the expansion to get to help to first responders. Just because the community has brought so much to this organization. We wouldn't have our upstream trauma-informed workplace training services that includes BOSS, before operational stress. That program alone had 77,000 first responders and healthcare workers complete that course last year alone. Wow. 77,000. Train the trainer, trauma resiliency training program, a peer support training program, and a workshop called Trauma Informed Practice. None of that would have happened if we had, and would be happening to the extent that it is, if it wasn't for the addition of inclusion and addition of first responders into our spectrum of care back in 2016. Because when we started adding first responders into these now mixed group deliveries that included veterans, serving members, and first responders, and them telling us in these groups that I wish I had known about the psychoeducation that we're teaching a lot earlier in their operational careers and then their careers, they would never have led to us getting involved, or certainly not led us to as fast as we did, get involved in any upstream trauma-informed workplace training, which, as we know, is as critically important as any part of this paradigm, is getting the workplace and the organizations to be responsible and to have a role instead of just pointing the finger at every first responder or military member and saying, you're responsible solely for your self-care. We have nothing to do with it. And of course, couldn't be further from the truth. So much has happened with all of that push, early intervention, upstream, resiliency-based, psychoeducation, learning and teaching because of that move, that change here to include first responders. That to me is my biggest hallmark. We were going to be established from the military anyway, because that's how it all started because of Afghanistan. That was obviously the big first mover to get established as an organization doing something. But the growth and the change and all the work that we've been able to do in the last, 7 years has really been amplified extensively and significantly because of what first responders have brought us.
Well done. Well done. Is there anything that's coming up down the pipe that you can share that's new and exciting, or maybe an event?
So cycling has always been a signature fundraising event for us, going back to our battlefield bike rides that we do overseas in the Canadian battlefields of Europe every June. And then that led to a lot of people that can't make that ride or what have you that wanted us to do something here in Canada. So we established the National Ride for Mental Health. We'll have over 1,000 participants in every province and territory this coming Saturday. It's very much Terry Fox modeled. Pick your own route, pick your own distances, pick your own fundraising goal, ride as an individual, ride with your family, friends, your ride group, and get out there and foster important conversation around mental health. For us, it's education, awareness, and then fundraising is how our model has been built. That you don't really get to fundraising if you don't have education and awareness happening. So this is a big event for us. We'll have an in-person ride in Ottawa in the capital on Saturday, as well as just dozens and dozens of community events taking place across the country. So that's exciting for us. It goes a long way to do a lot of things for the organization. And then looking ahead to the fall, we hosted our first ever Ontario-based. This was the Ontario First Responder Mental Health Conference, but it comes off the heels of attending the BC First Responder Mental Health Conference in January. I was able to attend with our team in the province, and just seeing the success of that and wanting to have these types of events in other provinces across the country, because it's such an effective way to bring the community together, especially after COVID. That was a big thing. We sold out the International Center by the airport in Toronto, 500 attendees. We put it together in less than 90 days, and it was a huge success. So that really got us going again and into the summer season, where we've continued to have, like I say, our battlefield bike ride in June. We have events all over the place across the country, but this one coming up on the weekend is a biggie.
Fantastic. How can people learn more about Wounded Warriors Canada? How can they connect with you? And is there any volunteer options for people to stand up and say, hey, how can I help?
Yeah, always. Feel free just to reach out to me personally. Scott at woundedwarriors.ca is my email. Woundedwarriors.ca is the website where all of this information lives, be it from, most importantly, from a program perspective. If anyone wants to learn more about any one of our programs and services, they all have their own independent pages and application capabilities on those pages. And then if for questions and so forth, they can just reach out to me anytime, and I'm happy to help steer them in the right direction here through the organization.
Awesome. Is there an opportunity for people to volunteer?
Yeah, volunteer for sure. As we're back into the event swing of things now, and there's all sorts of different ways that we're looking to build a volunteer side of the foundation here, because the health services side is the health services side where all that clinical work takes place. But as we come back to the event pace that we had going into 2020 March, we're looking, we'll have a greater need now than we have had in the last 3 years anyways, from a volunteer perspective. So if you're interested, reach out just the same, and we'll begin that conversation.
Fantastic. Well, Scott, it's been an honor to chat today. We really want to appreciate and acknowledge your dedication to the mental health in the first responder community, but also that nice catchword you had, the techs or the
trauma exposed professionals.
There we go.
EXP. That's our new.
Yeah, I love it. That is perfect. And I think I just want to acknowledge the kindness from our standpoint, the work that Wounded Warriors and yourself and your team is doing for that whole community. So thank you.
Thank you for your time and everything you've done for your service and all you've given.
Fantastic. All right, everyone. Hope you enjoyed our conversation with Scott from Wounded Warriors. Until next time, stay well.
Thank you for tuning in to Beneath the Helmet. We hope that this podcast has provided you with valuable insights into the world of firefighters' health and wellness. Remember, caring for your physical, mental, and spiritual well-being is crucial to achieving optimal performance. Join us next time on Beneath the Helmet for more inspiring conversations. Until then, stay well.